Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Caroline Garnett McGraw with The Clearing, and today I'm here to talk about how adverse childhood experiences might be holding you back from healing. So, a lot of what we do at The Clearing is working with these underlying core issues that really hold us back and prevent us from living the lives that we could live, full and healthy, happy lives. So, today we're going to dive into what are these adverse childhood experiences? How are they holding you back? And how can you break through them and heal and recover and come out on the other side? So, adverse childhood experiences, they're also known as ACEs or ACEs. You might see them referred to in that way. And there was a major study done from 1995 to 1997 with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and Kaiser Permanente, looking at the impact of adverse childhood experiences on a whole host of medical and mental health conditions. And they broke down these adverse childhood experiences into three different categories. And so here are these categories: abuse, which could include physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, and even spiritual abuse. There is neglect is the second category, and that can also happen on all levels, but it's primarily physical neglect and emotional neglect. So physical neglect would be, your parents don't give you healthy food, or they don't provide enough clothing for you, or they don't take you to the doctor. And emotional neglect is they don't express love for you, they don't hold you, they don't nurture you. And the third category was household dysfunction. And that encompasses a wide variety of things, but it could include divorce, having a family member with a substance abuse issue, untreated mental illness, especially depression, but it could also be having a family member with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, particularly if they were untreated, and having any kind of trauma that is considered household dysfunction. You might also have something like a family member in prison that would fall under household dysfunction. So the three broad categories of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And what the researchers found was that there's a really strong link between the number of ACEs that you have and your likelihood of dealing with many other health issues, of which addiction and substance abuse is one of them. So the more ACEs that you have, the higher the likelihood that you might struggle with addiction issues later in your lifetime. However, very interesting point of this study, that addiction is by far not the only experience that's correlated with these ACEs. Mental health concerns such as depression, hopelessness, suicide attempts are also highly correlated with ACEs. There's also obesity, heart disease. There are many other health markers that are correlated with these things. However, I also want to mention that just because you've had adverse childhood experiences does not mean that your destiny is set in stone. Yes, there are a higher proportion of people who have these childhood traumas and later develop these addictions and these health issues, but there are also plenty of people who have these really challenging experiences and go on to have incredibly rich, productive, and healthy lives. So it does not mean that you're doomed if you have a lot of ACEs. And what I will do at the end of this is I will post a link to the original studies documents. They're pretty extensive. I'll also post an abridged version of the 10-question quiz that is most frequently used nowadays to talk about ACEs. So 5 of the questions have to do with you and your experience, and the rest of the questions have to do with your family members' experiences and the environment that you grew up in. So you can rank yourself and see how many ACEs that you have. And just so you know, for scoring, up to, I believe it's about 28% of people that they originally surveyed had at least one ACE. So if you are ranking them up and seeing that you have several, you are not alone. They're actually sadly common. They are sadly common, even in this day and age. And if you have 2 or 3 or 4 and higher is considered a lot. But again, everyone responds differently to these things. And this is not a death sentence if you have a lot of ACEs. That just means that you have an opportunity to rewrite your life, and you have an opportunity to change a path that you might have gone down because of the trauma that you endured. So that's what I want to spend the rest of the time talking about. Now that we know what ACEs are, let's talk about how can we heal them. And I think the first thing is just being grounded in that knowledge of you are the one who gets to create your life. You may have been dealt a very difficult hand in your childhood, and I by no means would want to minimize that. I myself, in many ways, I had a very fortunate upbringing and very privileged, but I took the ACE and I actually scored, depending on which version you take, at a 3 or a 4, which is considered high because I had some untreated mental illness. There was some physical violence in my household growing up. Just to share that from a place of, I'm not minimizing it. It was really hard at times. And I could see how that really could have set me up to go down a very dark path. But I also see how we are the ones who get to create our lives. So we may have been dealt this difficult hand, but we get to choose how we play that hand. To extend the card game analogy, if you are a really strong poker player, you can take what looks like a terrible hand and you can win the table depending on the other things that you do. I am by no means an expert card player, but you know what I mean? You can use your other skills. You can use your skills of reading people. You can use your skills of bluffing. There are a lot of ways to still win, even if you have been dealt a challenging hand. So, card game metaphor over now, I promise. Moving on to what else you can do to heal. So, what we teach in our program is this principle of spiritual psychology, which is that when we apply love to the parts of ourselves that hurt, we heal. That is a core principle, so I'll say it again. When we apply love to the parts of ourselves that hurt, we heal. And these adverse childhood experiences are often like signposts pointing out the parts of us that still hurt. Maybe it's the part of us that still hurts from our parents getting divorced and how that really shook up our world and made us feel like we couldn't trust anybody. Or maybe it's the part of us that was emotionally abused by our parent or by an older sibling and just feels small and feels scared and has a bully in their head that sounds like the bully that they had in real life when they were younger. And maybe you try and numb that pain with drinking or drugs or compulsive behavior. And even though the experience is over, that pain is still with you. So that's what we work on. We work on healing those parts of ourselves that hurt. And the cool thing is that when we do that, when we tend to those hurting parts of ourselves, then the compulsions and the addictions, they drop away. Because all those ever were attempts to manage the pain and the discomfort that arose from those adverse experiences, right? And so if we heal the pain, if we heal that underlying core issue, then we don't need to check out. We don't need to over gamble or exercise or use drugs or anything like that. We've healed the underlying core issue. So a lot of people ask us, well, how do you do that though? How do you apply love to the parts of yourself that hurt? We never learned that in school. I agree. Oh my goodness, this is something that does not get taught. And there are myriad techniques that we teach in our program. But one of the ones that you can start off by doing now, it's very accessible. It's called opposite hand writing. And so what you do is you start a conversation by using your dominant hand and you write, hi, how are you? What's going on for you? And then you answer with your non-dominant hand. And that non-dominant hand really allows you to tap into the younger and more childlike part of yourself. And you may be very surprised if you hold this space, what can come up from that younger part of you. And the whole idea with this exercise is that you're holding a loving space. So before you start it, you get centered and you get peaceful and you hold this space for the younger part of you. And then you do this dialogue and you reparent the younger part of yourself. You offer love, you offer encouragement, you don't judge, you don't criticize. And again, in our program, we go into more detailed step-by-step instructions for exactly how to do this. And this is just one of many techniques. But I want to offer it to you today because it's something that you can do right here and now. And we find that doing this can really break through a lot of the walls that you may have put up around really engaging with the part of yourself that went through those traumas. And the reason that this is really helpful and that this tends to work is that working with your non-dominant hand engages different parts of your brain. And so it can help you to get past a lot of those blocks that you've put up. So that is just one technique. And as I mentioned, I will put up links to the ACE quizzes, and so you can take them and you can check out what your score is. But before we wrap up, I see we have some comments and I want to make sure to address those before we close. So let me just look on over. Oh, hi, Greg. Yes. If siblings grow up in the same household, how can one have had an ACE of an event and maybe not the other? Yes, this is an excellent question. So this has to do with the definition of trauma. So trauma on an emotional level is completely subjective. It's something that was shocking to you personally. It's how you experienced it. So you could have a pair of identical twins and have, for example, maybe your father yelled at you guys and was really, really upset. And one twin might just brush it off. I'm like, oh, dad's having a bad day. No big deal. And the other twin might completely internalize it and feel really, really shaken up by the way that their father acted. So on one hand, we do know that certain experiences tend to be very traumatic for most people. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental and emotional abuse, neglect, those are good examples. However, it's also important to recognize that what is traumatic for one person may not be traumatic in the same way or to the same degree for another person. So it really is subjective. And the questionnaire highlights these common areas that tend to be more traumatic for more people. But that does not necessarily mean that your suffering is less because your experience looked different. And actually, one of the areas that is not really highlighted on the questionnaire is sibling abuse. And that is a significant dynamic that can be very traumatic for some people. So the questionnaire tends to highlight the parent-to-child relationship, although there are a couple of questions that say, was anyone in your household hit or kicked or, et cetera. So it allows for that, was anyone in your family in a physically abusive relationship, basically. So great question. I'm going to look at some of the other comments. Mary Beth says, I learned some of this in a 28-day program last summer. I can tell you need to continue the work. Yes, it really is. I think we have a common conception that healing an underlying core issue is just like popping something in the microwave and hitting the 1-minute thing and, oh, look, it's done. And that's not to say that you can't heal it quickly, but that often it can take several iterations of working with the same event. It can take several layers. And this makes sense because you've had years and years of acting from this pain. So there's emotional baggage kind of built up around it. But I will say another thing from our program that I find very, very helpful is that we teach our participants to really follow their energy back and zero in on what is the first time that you can remember feeling this kind of abandonment, this kind of loss, this kind of despair. And we help them to isolate, what was that first incident? And when we work with that first inciting incident, what we find is that a lot of the other incidents that are on that same emotional plane tend to resolve because we've addressed that first time. So that's not to say you don't need to repeat the work, but it is also hopeful in the sense that when you really address that core root first time that something happened, which tends to be in childhood because you're early on in life, then a lot of those other issues can resolve themselves more quickly. So I see we have one more comment. Charlena, will this work for someone born addicted and abused and neglected all their childhood? Yeah. And that's actually something that the ACE authors highlight, which is that you can have someone who scores very, very high on this test, but if they have some kind of stabilizing influence in their life, for example, maybe their nuclear family is really dysfunctional, but maybe they have a grandparent who lives nearby and they see that grandparent enough that they provide a really stabilizing influence. And as a result, that person is able to have a more functional life and overcome a lot more than someone who had the same, on paper, the same ACEs, but didn't have that stabilizing influence. So that's how it looks in childhood, the power of that one person to really, change the trajectory of someone's life. But it's also true in adulthood. That's the amazing thing. Our co-founder, Joe Kelzer, likes to say that we tend to think there's this magical age where we all become adults and the things that happen to us as children stop mattering to us. And, oh, that was in the past, it doesn't matter. And he always says, no, there is no magical age. The things that happen to us as children still matter. They're always going to matter. But the great thing about this is that you can harness the power of having that healthy relationship. If you have one healthy relationship, such as with a counselor or with a close friend, but if you're dealing with really extensive stuff, definitely recommend a professional counselor. But if you're able to tap into one healing bond and healing connection, then that can help to heal and overcome a whole host of issues. There's a great quote by psychologist Judith Herman. She's an expert in trauma. And she says that while the unit of physical survival is 1, the unit of psychological survival is 2. So without another person, we can't go on psychologically. And the flip side of that is that when we do have a safe person and when we do have someone who can work with us and help us to heal these emotional hurts that we've been carrying around, then we can survive and we can even thrive despite really, really tough things that have happened to us. So great question. Great question. I'm just looking through the rest of the comments. Kathy says, do you provide services for 18-year-old boys? Good question. I could double check with our admissions, but I'm fairly certain that 21 is our minimum age. But if you give us a call, we can refer to other programs who are doing really excellent work and could provide support for those who are younger and for teenagers. For us, we've just found that we really want people to be in a very mature space when they're coming to us. And so obviously age is not the only factor, and maybe this is a very mature 18-year-old, but we could definitely refer you if that wouldn't work for our program. So any other questions before we wrap up? This is great. I love all the engagement. All right. Well, thank you for watching and for listening. And I am, as I said, I'm going to post those links to the Adverse Childhood Experiences resources. And also I'll post a link to our Healing Underlying Core Issues Facebook group. So if you want to connect with like-minded people, that is a group that we support and that you can connect with others who are exploring these same issues. And as always, if you would like to learn more about our program or get connected with ways that you can start to heal and recover from your addiction, we do confidential free calls at 425-275-8600. Once again, that's 425-275-8600. All right, signing off, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.